Welcome to Occult Mysticism, your path to spiritual alchemy. Today we explore Saint Germain on Alchemy, Formulas for Self-Transformation by Mark L. Prophet and Elizabeth Clare Prophet, a powerful guide to the ancient art of spiritual alchemy, the violet flame, and practical techniques for personal transformation and ascension. Join us as we unlock these sacred formulas. Subscribe for more esoteric wisdom. What is alchemy if its highest work is not the changing of lead into gold, but the changing of the human being into a conscious instrument of divine law? This is the central question that stands at the heart of Saint Germain on Alchemy, Formulas for Self-Transformation, recorded by Mark L. Prophet and Elizabeth Clare Prophet. The book does not present alchemy merely as a medieval laboratory art, filled with hidden furnaces, rare minerals, secret powders, and the old dream of metallic transmutation. It presents alchemy as a sacred science of life itself, a discipline by which consciousness, energy, motive, thought, prayer, and divine light are brought into deliberate cooperation. In ordinary imagination, the alchemist is a strange figure bending over crucibles in a dark chamber, searching for the philosopher's stone, hoping to turn base metal into gold, prolong life, or unlock the universal cure. This image is not dismissed by the book, but it is transformed. For Saint Germain, the visible art of transmutation is only the outermost sign of a deeper mastery. The true work is not merely to change the nature of metal. It is to change the quality of being. It is to refine the self, discipline the mind, purify desire, command energy, and learn how divine law may act through the human soul. The book's own definition of alchemy reaches toward this larger meaning. Alchemy is described as all composition, implying the relation between the whole of creation and the parts that compose it. Properly understood, it deals with the conscious power of controlling mutations and transmutations within matter, within energy, and even within life itself. This is why the work presents alchemy as the science of the mystic. It is not the property of curiosity. It belongs to the self-realized person who has sought and found his relation to God, and who is therefore willing to play his part in the order of creation. Before the doctrine begins, however, the book introduces a figure whose life, or legend, becomes the emblem of the teaching. He is the Comte de Saint-Germain, remembered in esoteric tradition as the Wonder Man of Europe. The opening portrait is deliberately mysterious. A countess asks whether his father had been in Venice around the year 1710. Saint Germain answers calmly that he himself had been living there at the end of the previous century and the beginning of the present one. When she objects that this would make him nearly 100 years old, he replies only that such a thing is not impossible. From the beginning, then, Saint Germain appears as a man standing outside ordinary time. The book does not simply offer him as an author. It frames him as a presence, ageless, elusive, courtly, brilliant, and difficult to classify. His birth, death, and true identity are said to be shrouded in mystery. Was he the lost son of a Hungarian prince? Was he an adept who had materialized a body? Was he a nobleman, a magician, a diplomat, a Rosicrucian, an Eastern initiate, or something stranger still? The book does not settle the question in the manner of ordinary biography. It allows the mystery to remain, because the mystery itself is part of the function he serves. In the memoirs and traditions gathered around him, Saint Germain is described as a man of extraordinary gifts. He speaks many languages. He knows the courts of Europe and the histories of remote dynasties with such precision that listeners feel he must have witnessed the events himself. He travels through Asia, Africa, Russia, Turkey, Austria, Persia, India, and Japan. He appears and disappears unpredictably. He is said to understand herbs, medicines, gems, music, painting, diplomacy, and the secret societies of his age. He is connected in the text with Rosicrucians, Freemasons, and Knights Templar, and with the mysterious occult work, the most holy Trinosophia. Yet the book does not present these wonders merely for ornament. They are not included only to make Saint Germain seem marvelous. They establish the kind of being he is meant to represent. He is the one who has mastered relationships between the invisible and the visible. He knows how energy becomes form, how thought becomes influence, how prophecy becomes warning, and how the higher law may press upon human events without violating human will. The stories told about him are deliberately extravagant. He wears diamonds on his fingers and shoe buckles. He perfects flawed jewels. He transmutes metals. He produces elixirs. He is said to have preserved youth, healed illness, and performed feats that astonished royal courts. One anecdote tells of a flawed diamond brought to him by Louis XV. The king asks whether Saint Germain can remove the flaw and increase its value. After a month, the diamond is returned without the blemish. Another tale presents him transforming a silver coin into gold. Another speaks of a dining room changed into a forest with deer grazing among the guests. A faithful narration must pause here and recognize the nature of the material. These are claims preserved within a hagiographic and esoteric tradition. The task is not to prove them in a modern scientific sense, nor to mock them from outside the worldview of the text. The task is to understand what they mean inside the book. They are demonstrations of mastery over matter, but they are also symbols of a larger claim that the human being is not meant to be a prisoner of circumstances. Matter is not the final tyrant. Energy is not blind. Form is not ultimate. Behind the visible world stands law, and behind law stands divine intelligence. This is why the book insists that the primary purpose of alchemy is not wealth. It is not the production of jewels, gold, power, or public marvels. The stated message is that the human being is not powerless. One does not have to remain merely a victim of conditions. Life can be altered. Destiny can be reshaped. The self can be transformed. And, in the larger vision of the book, nations and planets may also be changed when consciousness aligns with divine purpose. Saint Germain's public wonders, therefore, are portrayed as bait for a higher teaching. He dazzles courts in order to gain their attention. He enters the world of aristocracy not because he worships splendor, but because he hopes to influence those who hold power. In the book's account, he warns of the coming French Revolution and the bloodshed that will follow. He seeks to guide the monarchs of Europe toward reform before the old order collapses into violence. He dreams, according to this portrayal, of a United States of Europe, a peaceful transition from royal fragmentation to a larger unity. Here the book introduces one of its sobering themes. Even the adept cannot compel human will. Saint Germain may advise, warn, counsel, and demonstrate, but he cannot force kings and ministers to listen. He may foresee the disaster, but he cannot prevent it if those responsible refuse the necessary change. This becomes one of the moral foundations of the work. Alchemy is power, but it is not coercion. Spiritual mastery acts within law. It respects freedom, even when freedom is misused. The account of his warning to Marie Antoinette is especially important in this respect. Saint Germain is presented as foreseeing civil war, murder, exile, and the fall of the monarchy. He wishes to speak directly to the king, but court intrigue and fear intervene. The ministers oppose him. The moment is lost. The catastrophe unfolds. The alchemist sees what is coming, but because he is not a tyrant, he must withdraw when human authority refuses correction. This theme will return throughout the book. True alchemy requires right motive. It cannot be separated from reverence for life. To command energy without love is not mastery, but danger. To know hidden law without submitting the ego to divine purpose is to become accountable for misuse. The book therefore opens its teaching not with a promise of easy manifestation, but with warning. Power is real, but it is morally charged. The universe responds to law, but law does not excuse selfishness. The public Saint Germain, then, gives way to the instructing Saint Germain. The man of diamonds and prophecy becomes the teacher of spiritual science. He is no longer standing only in royal courts, laboratories, or secret diplomatic chambers. He now addresses the reader directly as a potential alchemist of the Aquarian Age. The dedication is significant. The book is dedicated to disciples of East and West who would become the first alchemists of the Aquarian Age. This places the work within a modern esoteric framework. It is not simply antiquarian. It is not a nostalgic return to medieval alchemy. It claims that the ancient science must be renewed for a new cycle of spiritual development. East and West are to meet. Mysticism and practical action are to be joined. The alchemist is not merely a solitary operator, but a participant in a planetary movement toward freedom and enlightenment. Book 1 begins with the phrase, "Studies in Alchemy," and it defines itself as the science of self-transformation. This is the foundation. Before the reader is given methods of precipitation, picturization, or command over matter, the reader is asked to understand what energy is, how it may be transferred, and why the moral state of the operator matters. The first lesson is the law of transfer of energy. Saint Germain begins with the biblical image of Christ walking upon the waters of the Sea of Galilee. In ordinary religious understanding, this is a miracle. In the book's alchemical understanding, it is also a lawful demonstration. The text interprets the event as an operation of levitation within a framework of cohesion, adhesion, magnetism, cosmic rays, and spiritual substance. The body of Christ is described as becoming light, not metaphorically only, but in the sense of being filled with a higher radiance capable of altering its relation to physical density. This is a striking move. The book does not deny miracle. It redefines miracle as higher law. What appears impossible to ordinary perception is not necessarily a violation of nature. It may be the action of a subtler nature, unknown to the mass mind, but available to the master. The miracle is not lawlessness. It is law understood from above. Peter's attempt to walk on the water becomes an example of transferred authority. While his vision remains fixed on the Christ, he participates in the higher energy field. When fear enters, the condition changes. The body becomes dense again. He sinks. The lesson is not merely that faith is emotionally comforting. The lesson is that consciousness affects participation in energy. Fear is not presented as a private mood alone. It is a vibration, a vortex, a densifying force. It interrupts the alchemical tie. The same principle appears in the story of the woman who touches the hem of Jesus' garment and receives healing. The text treats this as another example of energy transfer. Divine love responds impersonally to faith. It is not favoritism. It is not superstition. It is the law of spiritual energy answering the call that is capable of receiving it. From these examples, Saint Germain states a central proposition. The transfer of energy is vital to alchemy because without it, one cannot create matter. Nothing cannot create something. Manifestation requires energy, source, direction, and lawful transfer. This is one of the book's most important doctrines. The alchemist is not making something from nothing in the crude sense. He is learning how the substance of life is drawn, formed, and directed through consciousness. But this teaching immediately brings danger. Saint Germain warns that it is possible to wrest secrets from the hand of God even when the individual's motive is not pure. In other words, occult knowledge may operate through people who are not morally perfected. The universe has laws, and laws may be discovered or manipulated. Yet the one who misuses them does not escape accountability. Every use or abuse of energy returns to the user. This is why reverence must come before technique. The only fear permitted, the book says in substance, is holy awe before God. This is not trembling superstition. It is respect for the wisdom that formed creation. The student must not approach alchemy with greed, vanity, idle curiosity, or fascination with power. Those who misuse universal forces for selfish ends may gain temporary results, but they will eventually relinquish what they seized. The penalty is not arbitrary punishment. It is the lawful consequence of discordant action within a moral universe. Here the book's teaching resembles the deeper warnings found in many initiatic traditions. Power without purification magnifies error. Desire without discipline scatters force. Knowledge without love becomes dangerous. Therefore, Saint Germain praises not merely alchemy, but the proper use of spiritual alchemy. The ancient alchemist, he says, has always been a colorful figure, and time has gilded that image. Yet the real freedom of the alchemist is found not in theatrical mystery, but in the simple graces of life. This is a crucial correction. The book is filled with extraordinary claims, but its first moral pressure is toward simplicity, reverence, service, and self-command. The marble must not obscure the law. The legend must not replace the discipline. Saint Germain then gives the inner meaning of alchemy as all composition. The whole of creation and the parts of creation are related. To practice alchemy is to understand how the divine all expresses through particular forms. The science concerns mutations and transmutations within matter, energy, and life. but the student must begin with himself. He must understand his own authority in the universe, his own relation to God, his own responsibility within his world and affairs. Saint Germain's stated purpose is direct. He wants to make the reader an alchemist in the truest sense. This means becoming familiar, at inner levels, with the alchemistry of God and with the way each facet of creation is brought into manifestation in matter, consciousness, and daily life. The student is told to meditate, reread, and call to the I Am presence for illumination. This reveals the devotional atmosphere of the book. The work is not presented as merely intellectual. It is practical, mystical, and prayerful. The I Am presence is one of the key terms that will become more important later. For now, it may be understood as the divine self, the God-centered reality of the individual, the higher source of illumination and right desire. Saint Germain's alchemy does not begin with personal whim. It begins with contact between the outer self and the higher self. The student is not asked to impose random desire on the universe, but to discover what the real self actually intends to bring forth. The second lesson concerns the purpose of the alchemical experiment. Saint Germain begins with a sharp statement: void is unfruitful energy. The alchemist must learn the value of time, space, and opportunity. Freedom is won through quest and conquest, but chiefly through the conquest of the finite self. This is one of the book's clearest spiritual principles. The first enemy is not matter. It is not society. It is not outer limitation. It is the finite self, the contracted consciousness that mistakes its temporary impulses for true will. True mastery comes through the soul's magnetic heart call to its divine source. This language is important. The alchemist is not merely a mental technician. He is not a cold manipulator of cosmic energies. He is a being of desire, love, aspiration, and devotion. His power begins when the heart turns toward the higher source from which right creation proceeds. The purpose of an alchemical experiment, therefore, is not to impress others. It is not to imitate the fantasies of the ego. It is to bring forth a design rooted in the real self. The student must ask, what is worth creating? What is lawful? What serves the soul? What reflects the divine pattern rather than the restless demands of the lower personality? Saint Germain warns that if key ideas are not created from within the alchemist, then the act becomes hapless or imitative. If the student imitates God, in the sense of mirroring divine order, the work is noble. If he imitates human vanity, his consciousness remains pitiable. This distinction is subtle but central. The alchemist must imitate the highest pattern, not the cravings of the mass mind. The text therefore instructs the student to commune with himself, not in narcissism, but in order to perceive the inspiring thoughts of the Creator within the radiant mind. Creation should begin from interior alignment. Before there is blueprint, there must be purity of purpose. Before there is manifestation, there must be inward listening. Saint Germain is aware that some readers come wanting the Philosopher's Stone, the secret of Aladdin and Midas, the magical property that grants wealth, power, or display. He refuses this expectation. He says, in effect, that the early lessons must be absorbed with humility, otherwise the student will reach the end of the course still lacking the essential key. The failure would not lie in the teaching, but in the student's motive. This is one of the great safeguards of the book. It keeps returning the reader from spectacle to character. The Philosopher's Stone is not handed to the greedy. The secret of manifestation is not safe in the hands of vanity. Spiritual alchemy begins with purification of desire, because desire provides direction to energy. If desire is corrupted, the resulting manifestation is also corrupted. Saint Germain also clarifies that not all ancient alchemists sought only riches and honor. Some understood the higher work, but the common mistake was to make gold the goal. The true work of alchemy is not the accumulation of external treasure, but the emergence of inner gold, integrity, illumination, mastery, and participation in divine creation. The gold outside is secondary. The gold inside is essential. The discussion now turns to the sacred science itself. The book presents true alchemy as exact, lawful, and spiritual. It is not superstition. It is not mental chaos. It is not wishful thinking dressed in mystical language. It is a science of spirit, more exact than mundane measures can yet determine. This does not mean that it fits within ordinary materialist science. Rather, the book claims that spiritual law has its own precision, and that its proof is seen through action in consciousness and life. This point is essential for understanding the entire work. Saint Germain's worldview is not random magic. The universe is ordered. God is intelligent. Energy acts through law. Thought has form. Motive has consequence. Faith has function. Prayer is not mere consolation, it is participation in causation. To understand alchemy, one must begin to think in terms of causes rather than effects. Human beings, the text argues, have ridden the tide of the outer world of effects while neglecting the inner causative realm. This is why unhappiness persists. The flaws must be mended at the level of cause. When the cause is healed, the person becomes self-healed and self-revealed. The alchemist is therefore not simply someone who changes outer conditions. He is someone who learns where conditions begin. The book calls for a reversal of harmful human attitudes. The student is asked to replace wrong concepts with right methods so that life may rise out of the dense force field of human limitation. The language is cosmic, but the practical implication is plain. One must stop treating consciousness as a victim and begin treating it as a field of responsibility. This leads naturally into the chapter titled Dare to Do. Faith becomes indispensable. The book argues that countless wonders associated with Christ have been forgotten, doubted, or relegated to myth because human beings have lost confidence in the power of God. Saint Germain pleads for a renewal of faith not as sentimental belief, but as a requirement for manifesting divine law. Without faith, he says in substance, it is impossible to manifest the perfection of God's laws. Yet this faith is not laziness. In every science, proficiency requires knowledge and persistent application. Even genius has its hours of study and practice. This is another important correction. The student must not confuse faith with passivity. Faith opens the inner door, but knowledge and practice carry the work forward. Alchemy is placed in the laboratory of consciousness. This phrase is useful for the entire narration. The laboratory is no longer only an external room with instruments and substances. The laboratory is the human mind, heart, body, memory, imagination, motive, speech, and will. The fires are emotional and spiritual as well as physical. The metals are qualities of the self. The impurities are fear, selfishness, confusion, vanity, resentment, and despair. The gold is the integrated soul aligned with divine purpose. In this laboratory, idle curiosity must be exchanged for moral grandeur. The true alchemist stands humbly before the teacher. He does not demand secrets as an entitlement. He prepares himself to receive them. The attitude matters because the attitude is already part of the experiment. A proud mind cannot receive in the same way as a reverent one. A scattered will cannot hold the same pattern as a disciplined will. A selfish desire cannot precipitate the same good as a purified desire. The next chapter turns to the need, power, and motive to change. Saint Germain begins with the present hour. The now must be used as a chalice of spiritual opportunity. This teaching may seem simple, but within the book it has great weight. The alchemist cannot postpone transformation into an indefinite future. The present is where energy is directed. The present is where decision occurs. The present is where the mold can be altered. The power to change is within every person. But the book does not present this as shallow reassurance. It immediately connects change to higher objectives, exalting principles, and selfless service. Life must be honored by something greater than convenience. The will to change must not arise merely from dissatisfaction or ambition. It must be rooted in the desire to become aligned with divine reality. Saint Germain insists that looking to another is not the solution to one's problems. No outer savior, teacher, institution, or condition can substitute for the alchemical work within the self. The enlightened alchemist must summon strength from the invisible realm and use transmutative processes in his own world and affairs. Outer tools may assist, but the decisive action begins in consciousness. This is one of the book's most empowering teachings. Everyone should see life, at any age or time, as capable of change for the better. No condition should be treated as final in the absolute sense. Law and justice are real, but the universe also contains creative methods of transcendence. The alchemist learns to work with law at a higher level, not by denying the facts of life, but by entering the causative realm from which new facts may emerge. Saint Germain calls for the rejection of outworn concepts. Just as earlier ages struggled to accept that the earth revolved around the sun, so the human mind struggles to accept higher laws when they contradict familiar assumptions. What is obvious to the trained chemist seems like a jumble of symbols to the unlearned. Likewise, spiritual alchemy may seem impossible to the untrained mind, but this does not prove that it is false. It may prove only that the consciousness has not yet learned the language. The course, then, does not aim merely to confer knowledge. It seeks acceptance of knowledge through realization. The laws of alchemy must be seen in action in the human being. The proof is not only in argument, but in transformation. When the student learns to mend the flaw at the level of cause, life changes. When old attitudes are transmuted, new possibilities arise. When the person stops feeding the gravitational pull of fear and limitation, the soul begins to ascend. Saint Germain connects this with the Lord's Prayer. The need to change corresponds to the kingdom. The power to change corresponds to the power. The motive to change corresponds to the glory. The familiar prayer becomes an alchemical formula. Kingdom, power, and glory are not distant theological words. They become stages of inner realization. One must recognize the need, claim the power, and purify the motive. This brings us to the chapter on molding factors. The mold, Saint Germain says, is the problem. The human being descends into form with an original hope of heaven, but from early life onward, pressures begin to shape the tender screen of the mind. Parents, family, environment, culture, experience, education, media, example, fear, desire, and collective thought all leave impressions. The personality becomes plastic under these influences. What was first identified with divine good becomes shaped by countless patterns. This is a profound psychological moment in the book. Alchemy is not only about commanding light. It is also about understanding how the self has been formed. The student must see the mold before he can change the product. If the matrix is flawed, the outer result cannot easily exceed it. Therefore, the alchemist must examine the patterns that have shaped perception, desire, fear, and expectation. Experience is one way consciousness expands, but Saint Germain says it is not the only way. A moment spent with God or with one of the cosmic band can exalt consciousness instantly. This means that spiritual contact can alter the mold more quickly than ordinary experience. Grace, illumination, and contact with higher beings become accelerators of transformation. But the student must be receptive. The book also speaks sharply about cultural contamination. It criticizes forms of expression that degrade consciousness, confuse the populace, or corrupt the young. Whether one agrees with every cultural judgment or not, the alchemical principle is clear. Impressions matter. What enters the mind helps form the mold. Images, words, examples, and repeated ideas are not neutral. They become shaping factors in the subtle substance of personality. Therefore, personal freedom requires discernment. The alchemist must guard the impressions he receives and the patterns he reinforces. He must learn to distinguish between culture that elevates and culture that fragments. He must understand that freedom of expression, in the highest sense, is meant to release light, not merely multiply confusion. To explain purification, Saint Germain returns to metallurgy. Precious metals require intense heat to release impurities. Likewise, the soul requires the fire of transmutation. Heat is not comfortable, but it is necessary. The alchemical fire exposes what is foreign to the pure metal of being. It melts rigidity. It brings hidden elements to the surface. It separates what belongs from what does not. This is why true self-transformation often feels like crisis. When old molds dissolve, the personality may feel unstable. When impurities rise, the student may mistake exposure for failure. But in alchemy, the rising impurity is part of purification. The fire reveals what must be removed. The crucible is not punishment. It is the vessel of refinement. The chapter on methods of transfer then begins to approach more practical alchemy. Saint Germain declares that light is the alchemical key. The first fiat of creation is, "Let there be light," and this becomes the first step in proper precipitation. If the human being wishes to emulate the Supreme Father and precipitate as a true son of light, he must observe the methods of the Supreme Intelligence. Creation begins in light, but it proceeds through pattern. The student must create a mind blueprint of the object or condition he wishes to bring forth. This blueprint should include size, proportion, substance, density, color, quality, and detailed picture form. The teaching is precise because vague desire produces vague results. The alchemist must learn to form thought with clarity. Once the visualization is complete, it must be sealed. This is the second fiat. It is finished. The sealing does not mean that no future improvement is possible. It means that the present pattern must be released as a finished work to the builders of form. A blueprint that is never completed cannot be acted upon. A mind that endlessly revises, doubts, worries, and reopens the pattern dissipates its own creative force. This is one of the book's clearest practical insights. Creation requires decision. A thought form must be sufficiently complete to be entrusted to manifestation. The student must not confuse perfectionism with mastery. There will be later models, later refinements, later improvements. But each act of precipitation requires a moment when the design is sealed and released. After sealing comes protection. Saint Germain instructs the student to tell no man. This is not merely secrecy for drama's sake. It is presented as a law of precipitation. Human thought and feeling can disturb the creative matrix. Jealousy, doubt, ridicule, collective resistance, and even unconscious interference may scatter the energy of the design. Therefore, the alchemist avoids dissipating force by exposing the unfinished experiment to too many minds. The principle has a simple psychological meaning as well. Many creative works die because they are spoken about too soon. The energy that should have gone into formation is spent in explanation. The sacred charge leaks away. The work becomes vulnerable to other people's doubts before it has gained strength. Saint Germain's counsel is to protect the inner pattern until it has sufficient substance. At this stage, the book's metaphysics of thought becomes clearer. Thought is not treated as a private abstraction. It is energy. It has wave-like force. It can scatter or be scattered. It can form matrices. It can attract substance. It can be sealed, guarded, strengthened, or disrupted. The alchemist must therefore become responsible for thought, because thought is one of the instruments by which energy enters form. Geometric figures are also introduced as part of the creative process. The square, triangle, circle, ellipse, and parallelogram are employed throughout the macrocosmic and microcosmic worlds. Geometry is not merely mathematics. It is the architecture of manifestation. Form emerges through proportion. Divine intelligence creates by pattern, and the human alchemist learns to participate in pattern consciously. This movement from light to blueprint, from blueprint to sealing, from sealing to protection, shows that the book's alchemy is not simply desire intensified. It is ordered imagination. It is disciplined picturing. It is reverent participation in the method of creation. The alchemist does not shout wishes into emptiness. He studies how God creates and then seeks to go and do likewise in a lesser but lawful way. Yet all of this remains subordinate to motive. The question is not only, can this be precipitated, but should it be precipitated? The student must know what he wants, but also why he wants it. The will of God, the will of the higher, is identified with the will of the real self. The lesser self is crowded with impulses and fragments of human knowledge. It does not always know its own good. Therefore, the alchemist must become acquainted with the reality of himself. Saint Germain uses the image of Aladdin and the genie. The alchemist rubs the lamp of pure knowledge, but the true genie is the divine genius within, the higher self that can reveal the right desires of immortal being. This is a beautiful and important reinterpretation. The genie is not a servant of greed. It is the hidden intelligence of the real self. It does not exist to grant every impulse of the lower personality. It exists to bring forth what belongs to the soul's divine pattern. The narration has now reached the threshold of the book's deeper practice. The first lessons have established the law of energy transfer, the purpose of the experiment, the sacred nature of the science, the need for faith and disciplined application, the power to change, the importance of motive, the influence of molding factors, and the first method of precipitation through light, blueprint, sealing, and protection. But Saint Germain is not finished with foundations. Before the book moves into the more detailed formulas of practical alchemy, it continues to insist that consciousness must be commanded. The alchemist cannot be ruled by fear like Peter sinking beneath the waves. He cannot be ruled by vanity like those who seek the philosopher's stone for riches. He cannot be ruled by the mold of society, nor by the contaminated impressions of the mass mind. He must become awake in the field of causation. The crucible of being awaits him. There the fire will test the design. There the soul will discover whether it truly wants freedom or only a more decorated form of bondage. There the student will learn that alchemy is not a trick performed upon matter, but a covenant with light. Within that covenant with light, Saint Germain now asks the student to do something more difficult than believe in alchemy. He asks the student to command consciousness. This command is not a violent act. It is not the suppression of thought by tension, nor the freezing of the emotions into lifeless obedience. It is the sacred art of directing attention. For in this teaching, attention is not a casual faculty. Attention is the open door through which energy flows. Wherever consciousness is held, there substance gathers. Wherever thought is repeatedly placed, the subtle mold is strengthened. Wherever fear, resentment, hope, prayer, imagination, or love is concentrated, life begins to respond. The alchemist must therefore learn that he is always creating, even when he does not know it. He creates through memory. He creates through expectation. He creates through the repeated rehearsal of failure. He creates through the quiet image he holds of himself. He creates through the atmosphere he accepts as normal. To command consciousness is to stop living as though the mind were only a mirror of events. The mind is also a lamp, a magnet, a mold, and a doorway. Saint Germain's instruction is reverent at this point because he is approaching what he calls the laws that govern outer manifestation. These laws are not to be treated as toys. The student is not invited to become clever with occult force while remaining careless with motive. He is invited to perceive the relation between nature and the self, between divine geometry and human understanding, between the order of God and the possibility of man's participation in that order. The phrase, "Man, know thyself," becomes more than a philosophical maxim. It becomes an alchemical requirement, but the self to be known is not the surface personality alone. It is not merely the bundle of habits, wounds, tastes, prejudices, and temporary opinions that a person calls me. The self to be known is the truth of being beneath human concept. The student must learn to distinguish between the divine pattern and the distorted image he has inherited from fear, culture, education, family, collective opinion, and his own previous misuse of energy. This is why Saint Germain warns against criticism of others. The student's first task is not to rule another person's consciousness, nor to measure another soul by his own partial light. Every individual sees through the screen of his own being. Therefore, the alchemist begins by purifying that screen. He removes malice from his interpretations. He removes ignorance from his judgments. He removes the impulse to condemn before understanding. He recognizes that the world he sees is partly the world as it is, and partly the world as his consciousness has been conditioned to perceive it. This teaching is subtle but severe. If the alchemist wishes to master manifestation, he must master perception. If he wishes to command energy, he must command the inner movements by which energy is colored. The atom, in Saint Germain's vision, contains creative grace. But human thought and feeling can place discordant vibration upon that grace. The work of purification is therefore not a moral decoration added to alchemy. It is part of the science itself. Humanity suffers, the text suggests, because it approaches life through erroneous concepts. It misreads cause and effect. It mistakes the outer condition for the origin of the problem. It imagines that changing the scene will heal the self when the deeper distortion remains active within consciousness. The alchemist must reverse this. He must enter the realm of cause. He must ask what thought, what image, what fear, what desire, what inherited belief, or what separation from divine reality has given rise to the outer confusion. Yet Saint Germain does not present this work coldly. There is tenderness in his urgency. He speaks as one who sees souls held in bondage and longs to cut the chains, but who also knows that cosmic law does not permit coercion. He may teach, he may guide, he may answer the call, but the call must be made. The student must participate in his own liberation. From this point, the book deepens into the crucible of being. The crucible is the vessel in which substances are tested, heated, dissolved, refined, and transformed. In the outer laboratory, it receives metals. In the inner laboratory, it receives the human self. Everything that has been taught so far now converges in this image. Energy must be transferred. Purpose must be purified. The blueprint must be formed. The mind must be commanded. But all of this must happen within a being capable of withstanding fire. The first requirement of this crucible is the expansion of consciousness beyond isolation. Saint Germain names separation as one of the great deterrents to progress. The small ego feels itself alone against the universe. It stands in shadow, uncertain of the future, unsure of divine love, and therefore anxious before the opacity of events. From this condition arise fear, defensiveness, hoarding, pride, resentment, and despair. The cure is not mere optimism. The cure is the recovery of universal consciousness within the individual force field. The student must sense that he belongs to the cosmos, and that the cosmos, in a sacred sense, belongs within him. He is not an accident in hostile space. He is a point of divine identity, a living focus of God's intelligence, will, love, and life. To know this is not to inflate the ego, it is to dissolve the loneliness on which the ego depends. Saint Germain's language about God is deliberately expansive. God is not reduced to one rigid image. God is consciousness, life, intelligence, will, love, and a richness of attributes beyond ordinary mental boundary. The student must not cling to a narrow image of deity fashioned after human limitation. He must allow the divine to be personal and impersonal, intimate and universal, transcendent and present. In this wider apprehension, the soul begins to breathe again. The crucible of being is also the place where religion and spirituality are restored to their true dignity. Saint Germain does not treat them as shameful relics of ignorance. They are implements of the creative arts. They are friends of the alchemist because they help him transform the base elements of human nature into the gold of Christed accomplishment. This is one of the book's defining phrases in Substance. Alchemy is not limited to drawing three-dimensional objects from universal light. It may illumine the mind, heal unwanted conditions, and exalt the total nature of man from its base state to the golden standard where the law of love becomes natural. This is the point at which the book gives its compressed formula. Try. Theos means God. Rule means law. Eu means being. The combined meaning is God's law active as principle within the individual. The word is simple, almost childlike, yet it carries the practical burden of the whole work. To try is not merely to make an attempt. It is to bring divine law into one's being and act from that place. The alchemist is not told to speculate endlessly. He is told to try, to apply, to call, to purify, to command, to create. Before Book 2 begins, however, the text turns to a large historical and symbolic interlude, the mystical origins of the United States of America. At first, this may seem like a departure from alchemical instruction, but within the book's own architecture, it is not a departure. It is a widening of the field. Saint Germain's alchemy is personal, but it is also civilizational. The individual soul must be transformed, but nations too have destinies, karmas, symbols, initiations, and opportunities for freedom. The book links Saint Germain with the spiritual destiny of America. In its account, after the crowned heads of Europe failed to heed his warnings, he turned toward the New World, where the possibility of a more perfect union could be anchored. The United States is presented not merely as a political accident, but as a child of his heart, a field in which freedom might take form from east to west. The text's historical claims here should be handled carefully. It speaks from within the Ascended Master tradition, where hidden spiritual influence moves behind visible events. It does not simply tell the history of America as historians would tell it. It reads that history symbolically, initiatically, and providentially. The Revolution, the Constitution, Masonry, Francis Bacon, George Washington, the Great Seal, and the imagery of divine guidance are all drawn into a single esoteric interpretation. Francis Bacon is presented as one of the hidden architects of this destiny. The book portrays him as philosopher, statesman, scientist, author, and initiatic force linked to the project of restoring mastery over nature and establishing conditions for a new civilization. Bacon's Novum Organum and his plan for a reconstruction of sciences, arts, and knowledge become, in this reading, part of a larger alchemical preparation. Human knowledge is to be restored, not for pride, but for dominion, rightly understood. Masonry then enters the narrative as an organized vehicle of fraternity, unity, and spiritual discipline. The book emphasizes Masonic influence in the American founding, naming figures such as Washington, Franklin, Revere, Hamilton, and others as part of a broad current of national formation. Here again, the important point for the narration is not to pause for external debate over every historical percentage or claim, but to understand the role the material plays in the book. Masonry symbolizes disciplined brotherhood, soul-building, moral initiation, and the effort to bring invisible principles into civic form. George Washington becomes the central figure of this American alchemical drama. He is not treated merely as general or president, but as a vessel of order. The book presents him as the figure around whom the scattered states could gather, the sun-like center whose virtues helped define the presidency before the office had a known shape. His life, fortune, and sacred honor are interpreted as offerings to a cause larger than personal ambition. In the text's symbolic vision, he embodies the possibility that power can be governed by self-command. The Constitution is then treated as an outward form of inner law. It protects speech, religion, press, assembly, and individual destiny. The book presents this not simply as political mechanism, but as a civil expression of initiatic freedom. Each person must be free to work out destiny by the gift of free will. The nation, at its highest possibility, becomes an alchemical vessel in which individuality may mature into responsibility. The Great Seal of the United States received special attention. Its unfinished pyramid, its eye, and its Latin mottos are read as symbols of hidden order, providential oversight, and the new order of the ages. The book describes this symbolism as Masonic and initiatic, but not dull or decorative. It is a public emblem of a spiritual project, a nation called to build under divine inspection, still incomplete, still rising, still accountable to the invisible hand that conducts the affairs of men. The interlude also includes the tradition of George Washington's vision of America's trials. The goddess of liberty appears as a figure of heavenly intercession, and the nation is shown facing a sequence of crises. The first is the revolutionary struggle. The second is the Civil War. The third is a future or ongoing trial held at bay while the people determine their destiny by law and by love. The point is solemn. Freedom once established is not freedom permanently secured. A nation, like a soul, must keep choosing its higher pattern. This is why the America section belongs inside a book on alchemy. The same laws apply in different scales. A person can misuse energy, and so can a civilization. A person can become separated from divine identity, and so can a people. A person can form destructive thought patterns, and so can a culture. A person can be purified in the crucible, and so can a nation. The alchemical work expands from the private heart to the collective body. With this interlude complete, the reader is ready to enter Book 2, called Intermediate Studies in Alchemy. The tone changes, the foundation has been laid, the legend of Saint Germain has been introduced, the law of energy transfer has been explained, the crucible of being has been established, the national and planetary implications have been shown. Now the imperative becomes more direct: create. The command, create, stands at the doorway of the second book. It is not presented as a suggestion. It is the mandate of identity. When the Spirit breathed life into man, the clay tabernacle was filled with creative fire. The human being became an embryonic God, not in arrogant separation from the Creator, but as a child of divine creative essence. To be alive is already to receive energy. To be conscious is already to qualify that energy. To be human is to stand before the responsibility of creation. This is a crucial teaching. Saint Germain does not say that only the trained alchemist creates. He says, in effect, that everyone creates, because universal energy descends continually into consciousness. Like beads moving along a thread, moments of energy enter the chalice of being. Each one is imprinted by the individual's will, intention, neglect, fear, or love. When the fiat of creation is withheld, opportunity is lost. When the fiat is misqualified, energy builds for confusion. When the fiat is aligned with divine purpose, life begins to serve freedom. The human being, therefore, cannot escape creativity. Even refusal is a kind of creation. Idleness creates loss. Fear creates limitation. Confusion creates delay. Selfishness creates bondage. Love creates expansion. Faith creates openness. Clear design creates form. The question is not whether one will create, but whether one will create consciously, lawfully, and in harmony with the real self. This leads to one of the most practical aspects of Saint Germain's teaching. The alchemist must learn how to execute the design of freedom. Freedom is not mere release from restraint. It is the ability to manifest divine purpose without being bound by the lesser self. Whatever binds the soul to fear, inertia, addiction, vanity, resentment, or confusion is not the friend of the alchemist. Yet paradoxically, the alchemist seeks to bind the soul to its immortal appointment. He refuses the chains of limitation in order to accept the covenant of destiny. The difference between bondage and holy commitment is essential. The lower self is bound by compulsion. The higher self is bound by love. The lower self says, "I cannot." The higher self says, "I am called." The lower self is trapped by circumstance. The higher self is pledged to purpose. In this way, alchemy transforms even the meaning of discipline. Discipline is no longer punishment. It becomes the structure through which freedom can appear. Practical alchemy begins when the student stops thinking of creation as a vague dream and begins to recognize it as an ordered process. Saint Germain's method remains centered on light, thought, pattern, and divine cooperation. But Book 2 adds greater emphasis on alliance. The alchemist is not alone. He works with the higher mind, the Christ self, the I Am presence, the Ascended Masters, the angelic hosts, and the Brotherhood of Light as the text understands them. Alchemy is therefore not solitary willpower. It is spiritual collaboration. This is what the book means by spiritual alliance. The alchemist must not imagine that his outer mind, with its narrow knowledge and restless revisions, can bear the whole burden of creation. He must call upon the higher intelligence within himself and beyond himself. The higher mind is described as active beyond ordinary space and time, capable of holding patterns that the outer mind cannot hold. The outer mind may conceive the desire, but the higher mind can refine, correct, and perfect the pattern. This teaching protects the student from one of the great dangers of visualization, the assumption that whatever the outer personality imagines must be right. Saint Germain's alchemy does not simply empower desire. It educates desire. The student is told to give embryonic ideas to the higher mind for adjustment. A creation that begins as personal intention may have its true origin in the higher portion of the self. Conversely, a creation that seems attractive to the outer mind may require purification before it can safely manifest. To penetrate matter, then, is not merely to impose thought on substance. It is to understand matter as light lowered into form. The visible world is not dead. It is condensed energy, structured by intelligence. The alchemist must learn to work from the subtle toward the dense, from pattern toward appearance, from fourth-dimensional substance toward three-dimensional manifestation. Matter is not despised. It is honored as the final clothing of a higher design. The formulas for precipitation return to the sacred altar. Saint Germain plays on the meaning of altar as a place of change. At the altar, transformation occurs by God's law. But the law must not be separated from love. This is one of the strongest ethical warnings in Book 2. Because divine generosity allows humanity to use certain aspects of law, people have sometimes isolated the mechanical side of alchemy and used it selfishly. This is what the book calls magic in its lower sense: law without love, technique without sanctity, power without obedience to the divine heart. The example of Pharaoh's court is used to make the distinction. Aaron represents the true alchemist of spirit. The magicians can produce phenomena, but phenomenon is not the same as spiritual authority. The mechanical manipulation of force may astonish the eye, yet remain meaningless before God. A sign is not holy merely because it is unusual. Power is not divine merely because it works. The measure is motive, alignment, love, and the service of life. This warning is especially important for modern listeners. In a world fascinated by manifestation, energy, frequency, visualization, and occult technique, Saint Germain's teaching is easily misunderstood if reduced to a method for obtaining objects. The book does speak about materialization. It does describe the creation of mental pictures and even the precipitation of objects such as an amethyst Maltese cross. But its moral center is higher. It asks not simply, "What can you make?" but "What kind of being are you becoming as you make it?" The creation of the cloud becomes the next major teaching. The cloud is one of the book's most distinctive images. It is presented as a field of infinite energy, an individualized cloud of witness by day and pillar of fire by night, a spiritual atmosphere created for transformation, destiny, healing, and manifestation. It is not merely a metaphor for mood, it is the text's name for a concentrated field of divine substance and energy invoked around the student's life and purpose. The cloud changes the scale of alchemy. Instead of forming one object alone, the student begins to create a living environment of possibility. The cloud becomes a means by which destiny may be altered. Old spirals may be shortened. Negative karmic patterns may be transcended or transformed under divine law. The soul may be accelerated toward the realization of its own God reality. But again, Saint Germain refuses to turn this into mere miracle-making. He explicitly says that the purpose is not to form a society of magicians moving through the world producing spectacles. The aim is universal brotherhood, spiritual union, and the practical expression of true alchemy in the lives of students. The proficient alchemist may produce what others call miracles, but miracle is not the goal. The goal is union with divine purpose. The science of picturization develops this same principle in more precise form. The imagination is not treated as fantasy. It is the faculty by which inner pattern becomes graspable to consciousness. To picturize is to hold the desired form with clarity, proportion, color, density, quality, and purpose. It is to give thought a shape strong enough to attract energy. The student is not drifting into daydream. He is learning to make consciousness architectonic. Yet picturization must be purified by surrender. The alchemist may form the image, but he must also release it into God's wisdom. He must guard against forcing personal will into the place of divine design. He must distinguish between the clear image born of inner attunement and the restless image born of craving. The first has radiance. The second has tension. The first gathers light. The second drains energy. The book then widens the teaching to a decaying world. Alchemy is not meant only for private comfort. It can become a remedy for civilization in crisis. The world decays when people live as slaves to the senses, when confusion and chaos surround identity, when thought becomes disorderly, when desire becomes predatory, and when the sacred fire is forgotten. Alchemy offers the possibility that the individual force field may become ordered, purposeful, and radiant with universal grace. In this vision, the mind of the alchemist becomes a kind of cosmic reactor, a furnace of ideas for freedom and the breaking of bondage. This is powerful language, and it should be understood carefully. The book is not advocating domination of society by occult will. It is describing the transformation of consciousness so that the individual becomes a source of constructive spiritual radiation. A purified person blesses the field around him. A mind aligned with divine ideas contributes to the healing of the collective atmosphere. Before going deeper, however, Saint Germain pauses to discuss one of the greatest obstacles to successful alchemy: anxiety. This discussion is among the most psychologically accessible parts of the book. Anxiety is described as a major source of negative manifestation. It distorts perspective without producing real benefit. It causes people to hoard, overprepare, mistrust life, and deprive themselves of happiness through unnecessary apprehension. Saint Germain does not condemn reasonable provision for the future. He distinguishes lawful concern from the restless anticipation of disaster. Anxiety, in this teaching, arises from insecurity and an incorrect concept of the self. People feel unfulfilled, unloved, unwanted, uncertain of purpose, and therefore vulnerable to depression, self-deprecation, and emotional imbalance. For ordinary psychology, this is already significant. For alchemy, it is even more serious because anxiety qualifies energy. It introduces unstable ingredients into the formula. It prevents the mind from holding a pure pattern. It contaminates picturization. It bends the cloud with fear. Therefore, Saint Germain recommends a catharsis of mind, emotion, and even body before deeper alchemical work proceeds. The alchemist must empty unstable conditions so that creation may occur under clean inner circumstances. This is a vivid image. Before the experiment, the laboratory must be sterilized. Before the formula is compounded, the vessel must be clean. Before power is amplified, the hidden negatives must be exposed and transmuted. Here the book gives a serious warning about many mystery schools. If the ego is catered to instead of disciplined, the development of soul power may amplify negative momentum along with positive aspiration. Whatever is in the person's world expands when touched by sacred fire. If resentment is there, resentment may grow stronger. If vanity is there, vanity may become spiritualized. If fear is there, fear may magnetize more of its own substance from the collective pool of human thought. This is one of the most important teachings in the whole work. Spiritual practice does not automatically make a person pure. Power magnifies, fire reveals. Energy expands what it contacts. Therefore, the student must not seek greater force until he is willing to purify the contents of consciousness. Otherwise, even sincere aspiration may become mixed with subconscious distortion. Saint Germain links anxiety to the sense of separation from true identity. The human being has forgotten that he lives and moves within the divine. He acts as though he must sustain existence by personal strain alone. He forgets the watchful care of the Father, the intelligence of the body, the tenderness of universal law, and the possibility of communion with the Eternal One. This false separation creates fear. Fear creates anxiety. Anxiety warps the experiment. The remedy is faith, but not vague faith. It is a built mountain of faith strong enough to counteract the negative thoughts of the world. The student must stop lamenting failure as final. He must stop presenting problems as though they were proof of divine hostility. He must learn to see difficulties as karma, test, opportunity, or material for transmutation. In this way, even trouble becomes part of the crucible. Confusion is named as anxiety's companion. The Christ mind is presented as calm, yet capable of focusing fiery energy. This is a beautiful balance. Calm does not mean weakness. Fire does not mean agitation. The highest mind can be still and powerful at once. It can burn slowly or swiftly. It can radiate freedom, dominion, and God control. It can also set a boundary before energies that would hinder manifestation. The student is therefore urged to disengage from the negative thought pools of the world. This does not mean indifference to suffering. It means refusing to feed the mass atmosphere of fear, failure, resentment, and despair. The alchemist cannot clean the world while continually bathing in its psychic refuse. He must purify his own consciousness inside and out. He must remove residual substance absorbed through contact with collective misqualification. Anxiety must be replaced by confidence in the divine plan. The book's affirmation that one is born to win should not be heard as shallow triumphalism. In context, it is an antidote to the world's consciousness of failure. Saint Germain is not promising that the outer personality will always get its preferred outcome. He is declaring that the true being is not created for defeat. The soul's destiny is victory through alignment with God. This prepares the way for the next lesson. Nature yields to the childlike mind. The movement is deliberate. Anxiety is adult complexity in its fallen form, overcalculation, distrust, overburdened anticipation, and inward fragmentation. The childlike mind is not childish ignorance. It is simplicity, trust, immediacy, and openness to wonder. The alchemist must become capable of reverent simplicity without becoming naive. To become as a little child is to cease polluting the divine identity with self-will and self-indulgence. It is to return to original communion. It is to approach creation without the heavy overlay of cynicism and fear. Nature, in this teaching, yields more readily to the consciousness that is pure, direct, trusting, and aligned. The childlike mind does not argue endlessly with light. It receives, pictures, believes, and acts. This does not mean that alchemy is anti-intellectual. The book has already insisted on law, precision, practice, and knowledge. But intellect alone cannot precipitate the highest work if the heart is contracted. The mind must be clear, and the heart must be open. The blueprint must be precise, and the motive must be innocent. The will must be strong, and the soul must be trusting. As Book 2 advances toward its later chapters, the highest alchemy begins to reveal itself. The production of objects, however marvelous, is not the summit. The alteration of destiny, however desirable, is not the final goal. The true alchemy is the transformation of the person into a living altar of divine reality. The flame kindled within the being must expand. The alchemist must become one with the great exemplar, not merely imitate outer acts of power. The way of the tree of life, then, gathers the teaching into a larger mystical frame. The cloud is again presented as a means by which destiny can be altered, old karmic spirals shortened, and the realization of God reality accelerated. But this acceleration is not for egoic privilege. It is part of the work of the brotherhood, the welding together of the body of God upon earth, the joining of invisible spiritual order with embodied humanity. The tree of life is the symbol of connection, root and branch, heaven and earth, source and expression, I am presence and individual life. The alchemist must become willing to wear his wings, to practice daily diligence, to place his hand in trust, to forsake the past that has not produced the beauty he craves, and to let his heart become a cup lifted toward the highest. The essential prayer is surrender, not the lower will, but the divine will. At this point, the teaching circles back to Christ. The alchemist who is aligned may divide loaves and fishes, walk upon waves, fulfill lawful wishes, and become a benefactor. But these images must be understood as signs of restored sonship. The miracle is not spectacle. It is the natural act of a being whose immortal spirit prevails. The true son, the true alchemist, does not seize dominion for pride. He receives dominion because he has become transparent to God. This prepares the listener for the next great transition, where Jesus Christ and Saint Germain are presented together as way showers of the Piscian and Aquarian ages. The alchemical science is now ready to be interpreted through the passing of dispensations, from salvation, resurrection, and Christ consciousness to the violet flame, the spoken word, and the freedom fires of the Seventh Age. The Seventh Age, in this book, is not merely a period of time. It is a dispensation, a new spiritual opportunity, and a new method of divine contact. Jesus Christ is presented as the Piscian way shower, the one who reveals the path of the Christed life through resurrection, initiation, and reunion with the I Am Presence. Saint Germain is presented as the Aquarian master, the one who brings the violet flame, the science of the spoken word, and the practical means by which karma may be transmuted through conscious invocation. The two are not treated as rivals. They are presented as complementary. Jesus reveals the Christ incarnate. Saint Germain reveals the practical application of that Christ power in the Aquarian age. Jesus shows the soul what it means to become one with the Word. Saint Germain teaches the soul how to call upon the Word, how to use the divine name, how to invoke sacred fire, and how to make spiritual law active in the circumstances of life. This is one of the book's most distinctive theological moves. It reads Christianity through an esoteric and alchemical lens. The miracles of Jesus are not left as isolated wonders belonging to a distant past. They are presented as demonstrations of law, signs of what the Christ consciousness can do when the human vessel is perfectly aligned with the divine presence. The resurrection, the ascension, the multiplication of loaves and fishes, the walking upon water, and the transformation of water into wine all become evidence of the higher science of spirit. But again, the point is not spectacle. Jesus is not presented merely as a supernatural exception whose works no one else could ever approach. He is presented as the pattern, the exemplar, the open door. In the book's language, the Christ self is the mediator between the soul and the I Am presence. Through that mediator, the path of initiation leads toward reunion with divine reality. The soul is not meant to worship distance forever. It is meant to awaken to the Christ within. Saint Germain's role is to restore the name and the method. The name is I Am, that I Am, the divine identity revealed to Moses and made living in the mission of Jesus. For this book, the phrase I Am is not only a theological statement. It is a creative formula. It is the affirmation of God within being. When rightly understood, it is the key to the spoken word, the decree, the command of light, and the deliberate qualification of energy. Here the narration must be careful. The book's claim is not simply that words are psychologically powerful, although they are. It claims that speech, when aligned with the I Am presence, becomes an instrument of spiritual causation. Prayer, meditation, mantra, decree, and the sacred syllable are not merely expressions of feeling. They are alchemical acts. They release vibration. They summon light. They invoke the violet flame. They give testimony to the divine presence and, in doing so, call that presence into action. This is why the word of their testimony becomes so important in the book's reading of Revelation. The saints overcome not only by passive belief, but by active invocation. They bear witness to the living presence within themselves, and that witness is spoken. It becomes sound. It becomes command. It becomes a spiritual labor. The mouth, in this sense, becomes a temple gate. The tongue becomes a tool of alchemy. The violet flame is presented as the Aquarian gift of mercy. It is the Comforter's fire, the all-forgiving flame that transmutes misqualified energy. In ordinary moral language, one might say that a person repents and is forgiven. In Saint Germain's alchemical language, one also calls forth sacred fire to change the record, the substance, the vibration, and the momentum of past misuse. Forgiveness is not only declared, it becomes transmutation. This explains why the book's spirituality is so active. It is not satisfied with vague remorse nor with sentimental religion. It wants the disciple to participate in the purification of karma. The student is asked to call upon the I Am presence, invoke the violet flame, use the spoken word, and cooperate with the Ascended Masters in the work of self-liberation and planetary service. The soul is not merely waiting to be saved, it is being trained to become an instrument of salvation. The tradition presented here is universal in scope, even while it speaks in Christian and biblical language. Jesus and Saint Germain are described as deliverers, not only of Christians, but of Jews, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, Zoroastrians, Confucians, and all those whose sacred labor is their religion in God. This is not a narrow sectarian claim. It is an esoteric claim of inner universality, that the Christ is not confined to a single outer institution, and that the Holy Christ self is the inheritance of every son and daughter of God. The book's language is bold. It says, in effect, that the Messiah has already come in the person of each one's Holy Christ self. This does not diminish Jesus in the text's theology. Rather, it makes his mission transmissible. Jesus becomes the one who embodied the universal light of the Son of God and revealed the path by which others might also become Christed. Saint Germain then brings the Aquarian tools by which this realization can be accelerated. The threefold flame is introduced here as the seat of this inner authority. It is the divine spark of the Trinity sealed in the secret chamber of the heart. It is not an abstraction. It is the book's central symbol of the living God within man. The soul's power to overcome, create, purify, and ascend is rooted in this flame. The Christ self may be the mediator, the I Am presence may be the divine source, but the threefold flame is the living altar within the human heart. The book then turns briefly to sacred portraiture. The likenesses of Jesus and Saint Germain, painted by Charles Sindelar, are presented not merely as devotional images but as focal points of presence. The text says that Jesus appeared to the artist repeatedly until the portrait was completed, and that Saint Germain later appeared in the presence of Guy Ballard as the artist painted him. These claims belong to the devotional world of the text, and they reveal how strongly the book associates image, presence, visualization, and spiritual contact. This attention to image is not accidental. The entire alchemical method has already depended on picturization, immaculate concept, visualization, and the ability to hold a perfect pattern. A portrait, in this tradition, is more than art. It is a focus. It offers the mind a purified image through which devotion may gather. It helps the disciple visualize the master, call upon the master, and enter into inner relationship. Yet the book adds a safeguard. Neither the masters nor their portraits can be confined to any creed, religion, doctrine, or dogma. Their names cannot be used to seal a private interpretation of law or scripture. This is important because it prevents the devotional image from becoming sectarian possession. The master belongs to the law of light, not to the vanity of any one claimant. The devotee is invited to visualize himself with his right hand in the hand of Jesus and his left in the hand of Saint Germain. This is a gentle and powerful image. Jesus stands as the guide of resurrection and Christ consciousness. Saint Germain stands as the guide of freedom, alchemy, violet flame, and the spoken word. Between them stands the disciple, held in continuity between two dispensations, receiving salvation through one hand and freedom through the other. From this image of companionship, the book moves into the threefold flame of life. The transition is natural. If Jesus and Saint Germain are way showers, then the flame within the heart is the path they are showing. If the violet flame transfigures misqualified energy, then the threefold flame is the divine spark that must be expanded, balanced, and made victorious. If the spoken word calls down power, then power must be governed by wisdom and love. Book 3 is therefore the ethical heart of the entire work. It is called a trilogy on the threefold flame, the alchemy of power, wisdom, and love. The sequence matters. Saint Germain begins with power because power fascinates humanity. It is the glittering danger and the necessary gift. Men hunger for it, nations organize around it. Religions and governments mold themselves around its star. The heavens themselves seem to display power in cosmic form. Yet power, untaught and unbalanced, is also the great source of corruption. Power may be physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, electrical, chemical, nuclear, elemental, cosmic, temporal, political, social, religious, or karmic. The book's point is that all power is related and all power is qualified. Some is stored, some is static, some is dynamic, some decays quickly, some belongs to the divine and cosmic order, some belongs to the temporary human world. But every form of power becomes dangerous when it passes through an unpurified center. This center is the human consciousness. Here the Maltese cross becomes Saint Germain's great emblem of power under control. The cross is not used merely as a historical badge. It becomes an alchemical diagram. The vertical arm represents the descent of divine energy from spirit. The horizontal arm represents the human plane, the field of ego, action, opposition, and qualification. At the center where the lines meet is the point of decision. It is the orifice, the nexus, the place where heaven's energies enter Earth's domain and are colored by human consciousness. This is one of the most precise symbolic teachings in the book. Power does not become human action automatically in pure form. It passes through the point of qualification. There, attention, motive, feeling, thought, habit, memory, and will determine what the divine energy will become. The same light can be qualified as courage or anger, service or domination, clarity or fanaticism, healing or manipulation. The issue is not the original energy. The issue is the condition of the one who receives it. The book's diagram of the Maltese cross describes energies of spirit descending through the upper arm and then coalescing into matter through the three lower arms. These lower arms correspond to the balanced manifestation of power, wisdom, and love. The upper arm is the inflow of God's light. The lower arms are the outflow into the world of form. The center is the seat of conscious qualification. This is where the alchemist must be alert. Thus, the simple phrase, "as above, so below," receives a serious moral interpretation. The goal is not merely to prove that microcosm and macrocosm correspond. The goal is to make the microcosm actually reflect the purity of the macrocosm. If the energy released from the I Am presence into the heart were retained in purity from the moment it entered consciousness, then the outer life would mirror divine order. But because human beings misqualify energy, the world becomes a mixed field of beauty and distortion. This brings us back to self-dominion. Saint Germain quotes the ancient wisdom that the one who rules his own spirit is greater than one who captures a city. Power begins with self-rule. Not because self-rule is smaller than worldly power, but because it is more fundamental. The person who cannot govern anger, boredom, fear, dissatisfaction, vanity, resentment, and reaction is not truly powerful, no matter how much influence he appears to possess. The phrase, "the reins of power," is apt. The forces of life are like horses. Consciousness must hold the reins. Without guidance, strength becomes stampede. The human being who reacts to the abuses of others with equal or greater abuse is not acting. He is being acted upon. He is merely allowing another person's misqualification to determine his own. True power begins when reaction ends. Saint Germain names boredom as one abuse of power. This may seem surprising, but it is profound. Boredom is not merely a lack of entertainment. It is a draining of vitality from the soul. It is a failure to perceive the divine opportunity hidden in the present moment. It is consciousness falling into a vacuum. In boredom, the person denies the radiance of being and begins to leak energy into emptiness. Dissatisfaction is another abuse. It becomes destructive when a person refuses to acknowledge his own part in shaping weakness and instead transfers responsibility to others. Here the book is stern. Blame is not innocent. It is an energetic displacement. It takes the power that should be used for transformation and sends it outward as accusation. The result is stagnation, because the true point of change has been abandoned. Fear is another misuse, especially when projected onto God. Saint Germain criticizes the tendency of people to fashion God after their own insecurity. They imagine the divine as whimsical, unpredictable, harsh, or unstable because those qualities remain unresolved in themselves. A false image of God then becomes a source of further fear, and fear becomes a barrier to alchemy. One cannot cooperate freely with a God one secretly mistrusts. The remedy is not sentimental ease. It is dominion. The student must govern his own world through right use of power. This includes thought, emotion, habit, speech, memory, bodily energy, and spiritual aspiration. The alchemist must stop allowing the planetary atmosphere to decide his inner state. He must stop living as an echo of collective misqualification. He must become a conscious focal point of God's energy. The four lower bodies are then introduced as the receptacles of power. These are the physical, mental, emotional, and etheric sheaths of consciousness. Each receives and distributes energy. Each can assist the soul or obstruct it. Each must be purified if the temple of man is to be rebuilt by the wise master builder. The physical body stores energy in its cells. But if those cells are clogged by negatively qualified substance or by harmful residues, fatigue and weakness follow. The mental body interpenetrates the physical like water through a sponge, but its efficiency depends upon alignment with the other bodies. Fear, doubt, rebellion, impurity, or physical density can impede the free flow of light into the mind. The emotional body, when misused, becomes the most violent and volatile of the four. The etheric or memory body holds the records of past actions, present and previous embodiments, and exerts subtle pressure on the present moment. This teaching gives the book's alchemy a complete psychology. The problem is not only what a person thinks today. It is what has been stored in memory, crystallized in the cells, intensified in emotion, and repeated in mental habit. The alchemist must therefore work across all levels. He must purify the body, discipline the mind, calm the emotions, and transmute the memory record. Otherwise, the divine energy entering through the heart will encounter obstruction at every level of expression. The Maltese cross is offered as a thought form by which these levels may be brought under control. Its balance represents heaven and earth, spirit and matter, power and love, wisdom as the golden axis, and the divine energy descending into the crucible of being. The upper arm receives. The lower arms distribute. The center qualifies. This symbol becomes a meditation on responsibility. The west or left arm is associated with power and the blue flame. The east or right arm is associated with love and the pink flame. The lower arm is associated with wisdom and the yellow flame. Power by itself remains incomplete until qualified by love. Love must be directed by wisdom. Wisdom must be strengthened by power and warmed by love. The three are not separate virtues placed side by side. They are an interdependent alchemical balance. This is why Saint Germain does not encourage the reader to ask merely for more power. In fact, he says that if miraculous power were indiscriminately conferred upon all, it would be an immense abuse. Many students, he notes, expected a thaumaturgical formula by which precious stones or money might appear through Kabbalistic signs and secret words. But this expectation reveals a faulty level of desire. The greater need is not increased power, but understanding of how to use the power already given. This is a decisive correction. The book began with stories of Saint Germain's marvels, yet here he warns against obsession with marvels. The alchemist who wants power before wisdom is dangerous. The seeker who wants materialization before self-mastery is unready. The student who wants secret words but not purified motive has misunderstood the path. The universe is not stingy, but it is just. It withholds higher power when higher power would magnify abuse. At the completion of the teaching on power, Saint Germain turns naturally toward wisdom. The transition is not decorative. It is necessary. Power without wisdom becomes blind force. Wisdom without power may remain unrealized. Love without either may become sentiment without effective service. Therefore, the second plume of the threefold flame must be understood. Wisdom, Saint Germain says, is wise dominion. This phrase is revealing. Wisdom is not mere information, and it is not memory. A person may retain vast quantities of knowledge and still be unable to judge rightly, create intelligently, or act at the decisive moment. Knowledge may store the lines of a play. Wisdom understands how the play is written. Knowledge remembers facts. Wisdom knows proportion, timing, application, and meaning. This distinction is essential for occult work. The student may know terms, names, hierarchies, colors, rays, chakras, invocations, symbols, and doctrines. But if he does not know how to use them, when to use them, and whether they should be used at all, he has not yet acquired wisdom. Information can feed the ego. Wisdom disciplines it. Information can multiply speech. Wisdom teaches silence. Information can intensify ambition. Wisdom asks whether ambition serves the divine plan. Saint Germain then introduces re-embodiment as a keystone in the arch of being. In the book's worldview, the soul does not learn in a single life only. It moves through successive embodiments, carrying records, tendencies, debts, talents, opportunities, and unfinished initiations. Acceptance of re-embodiment, the text argues, helps the student understand the wisdom of the ages and the reason for being. Here again, the narration should remain faithful without overclaiming. The book teaches reincarnation as a fact of cosmic doctrine. Within its system, re-embodiment explains inequality of circumstance, differing degrees of attainment, karmic pressure, persistent tendencies, and the long arc of soul education. It allows the alchemist to see life not as an isolated episode, but as one chapter in an extended initiation. This perspective changes the meaning of difficulty. A limitation may not be arbitrary. A talent may not be accidental. A fear may not have begun in childhood alone. A relationship may carry unresolved energy from former experience. A vocation may be the continuation of sacred labor begun long before. The student is therefore asked to stop judging too quickly. The soul's story is larger than one lifetime's visible evidence. Yet this teaching is not given to encourage fatalism, karma explains, but it does not imprison. Re-embodiment gives context, but alchemy gives method. The whole point of Saint Germain's teaching is that records can be transmuted, energies can be requalified, patterns can be lifted, and destiny can be accelerated under divine law. The past has weight, but it is not absolute when the soul cooperates with sacred fire. Wisdom also teaches the eternal now. The future is not approached merely through anxiety or prediction. It is entered through the quality of consciousness held in the present. The now is the doorway because it is the only point at which energy can be qualified. The past leaves records. The future receives patterns. But the present is where the alchemist stands with the power to choose. To live in the eternal now does not mean to ignore time. It means to stand in the divine center from which time may be redeemed. The alchemist recognizes that every moment is a chalice. The flame can be invoked now. The thought can be purified now. The emotion can be mastered now. The spoken word can be released now. The pattern can be corrected now. The call can go forth now. This is wisdom's answer to despair. Despair says the past is too strong. Anxiety says the future is too dangerous. Wisdom says the present is alive with God. The door is open because the I am presence is not trapped in yesterday or tomorrow. It descends into the present point of consciousness, just as the upper arm of the Maltese cross narrows into the center. Saint Germain then directs attention to the etheric realm. In this teaching, the etheric plane is not vague imagination. It is the highest plane of matter, the realm of fiery blueprint, Akashic record, divine memory, ascended master retreats, and the more subtle realities that shape physical life. The etheric body of man is likewise the memory body, the envelope of the soul and the holder of the blueprint of Christ perfection, to be outpictured in form. This helps explain why memory is so important in alchemy. Memory is not only psychological recollection, it is energetic record. It may hold trauma, fear, habit, guilt, desire, promise, attainment, vows, and divine design. If the etheric record is clouded, the physical life reflects confusion. If the etheric blueprint is purified and contacted, the soul can draw down a clearer pattern of being. Wisdom therefore requires discrimination between upper and lower strata of the subtle worlds. Not every invisible influence is divine. Not every psychic impression is trustworthy. Not every inner image should be obeyed. Saint Germain's teaching repeatedly distinguishes spiritual mastery from mere psychic penetration. The legitimate path is purity, self-mastery, love, invocation, and alignment with the I am presence, not escape through drugs, sensationalism, or lower psychic methods. This is a critical point for the modern occult listener. The book is not endorsing every experience that seems supernatural. It is not saying that altered states automatically confer truth. It warns that people may try to take heaven by force through psychic means, chemicals, or forbidden arts, only to gain temporary results that the law will not allow them to keep. True wisdom seeks the tree of life by wholesome and legitimate means, soul mastery, integrity, purity, and step-by-step union with the whole. Here the threefold flame returns as the safeguard. Saint Germain describes the flame within the average human heart as small yet potent, a blue plume, a yellow plume, and a pink plume of God-charged light. The blue plume of power relates to faith, goodwill, and divine intent. The yellow plume of wisdom relates to illumination and the right use of knowledge. The pink plume of love relates to mercy, compassion, justice, creativity, and the radiant happiness of God. The flame is small, not because God is small, but because human consciousness has not expanded it. Each plume must be fed by attention, invocation, right action, and daily practice. If one plume grows disproportionately, imbalance results. A person may have power without tenderness, knowledge without love, love without strength, or devotion without discrimination. The goal is not excess in one direction, but balanced expansion. Saint Germain's teaching on balanced achievement is therefore one of the most practical in the book. Imbalance prevents both daily goals and the greater goal of Christ mastery. If wisdom increases, power and love must rise with it. If power increases, wisdom and love must answer. If love is actualized, it must be matched by wisdom and power. The threefold flame must rise as a trinity, not as a distorted triangle. This transforms the meaning of attainment. The most learned person is not necessarily the wisest. The most powerful is not necessarily the most advanced. The most affectionate is not necessarily the most loving in the divine sense. True attainment is measured by balance. The heart must become an altar where God is enthroned as power, wisdom, and love together. The book's view of wisdom also restores dignity to both study and inner attunement. Outer learning is valuable, but it is not sufficient. Holy wisdom may come through study, but also through communion with the great spiritual powers of light, with initiates in higher octaves, and with the inner teacher. The uneducated person may receive wisdom if humble and receptive. The learned person may miss wisdom if proud and closed. Knowledge has location in the mind. Wisdom requires the whole being. This is why the student must become childlike without becoming childish. The childlike quality discussed earlier in Book 2 now returns in a higher key. Wisdom can be received only when the mind is open, pure, and teachable. The alchemist must not assume that accumulated knowledge gives him mastery. He must remain capable of wonder, correction, humility, and obedience to the higher law. Nothing divine, Saint Germain says in substance, is ephemeral. Whatever is truly gained in God cannot be taken away. This is a consoling and demanding idea. Worldly achievement may vanish, possessions may pass, recognition may fade, physical strength may decline, but a flame expanded in God becomes part of the soul's eternal treasure. What is done in God's name becomes an achievement of eternity. The listener should now hear how far the book has traveled. It began with an ageless count, dazzling European courts. It moved through alchemical laws of energy transfer, visualization, precipitation, anxiety, and the cloud. It passed through the mystical destiny of America and the dispensation of the violet flame. Now it stands at the heart, contemplating a flame no larger than a spark, yet containing the Father's power, the Son's wisdom, and the Holy Spirit's love. The outer miracles have become inward architecture. The jewel has become the heart. The laboratory has become the four lower bodies. The crucible has become consciousness. The philosopher's stone has become the balanced threefold flame. And the true alchemist is now revealed not as one who merely commands matter, but as one who can receive God's energy without corrupting it. From here, the book turns to love. And this is fitting. For after power has been disciplined and wisdom has been clarified, the final and greatest test remains. Can the alchemist love without possession? Can he serve without self-display? Can he enter human relationships without compromise of the divine pattern? Can he allow the pink plume of the heart to rise until power no longer dominates and wisdom no longer grows cold, but both are fulfilled in the law of love? Love, in Saint Germain's teaching, is not weakness. It is not softness without intelligence, nor affection without principle. It is not the surrender of discernment in order to avoid conflict. It is not the sentimental veil by which the soul excuses its compromise. Love is a cosmic power, and because it is power, it must be understood with the same seriousness as the blue flame of dominion and the yellow flame of wisdom. The text now asks the alchemist to look carefully at the many things human beings call love. Some of them are true. Some of them are incomplete. Some are distortions. Some are beautiful beginnings that have become entangled with possession, fear, vanity, habit, or dependence. In ordinary life, love is often mixed with desire. It is claimed as ownership. It is wounded by expectation. It is withdrawn when it does not receive its preferred return. But divine love, as Saint Germain presents it, is something more central, more fiery, and more exact. Love is the cohesive power of the universe. Without it, worlds disintegrate. Without it, relationships decay. Without it, the cells of the body lose their spiritual harmony. Without it, the moral order collapses into fragmentation. In the book's symbolic and spiritual reading, hatred is not merely an emotion. It is a force that drives the love element from form, separating what should be joined and corrupting the natural function of life. Whether applied to the body, the family, the nation, or the planetary whole, the lesson is the same. Where love is withdrawn from the center, dissolution begins. This is why Saint Germain treats harmony as the fulfilling of the law of love. Harmony is not a thin peace maintained by suppressing truth. It is not a social politeness that leaves the deeper disorder untouched. Harmony is the right relation of all parts to the divine whole. It includes justice, mercy, freedom, discipline, tenderness, and correction. It does not evade the law. It fulfills the law by restoring proportion. The alchemist must therefore learn to distinguish harmony from compromise. A person may avoid conflict while inwardly surrendering principle. He may keep outward peace while permitting falsehood, manipulation, or spiritual decline. He may call this love because it appears gentle, but Saint Germain warns that peace without honor cannot heal the root. True love does not abandon truth in order to seem kind. It unites truth and mercy in the living flame of the heart. This is a severe doctrine, but it is not harsh. It asks the student to become mature enough to love without illusion. Love must be able to defend love. It must recognize what divides the children of light from one another, whether through flattery, hypocrisy, sexual entanglement, money schemes, resentment, spiritual pride, or subtle manipulation. The book's language is direct because it sees love as sacred substance. To corrupt love is not a minor emotional error. It is an alchemical failure at the heart of being. Before love can be rightly given, self-love must be purified. Saint Germain makes a vital distinction between selfish love and true self-love. Selfish love seeks to possess life unto itself. It holds people, things, ideas, relationships, and even spiritual gifts within the domain of exclusivity. It adorns the ego and calls that adornment affection. It desires not because it wishes to bless, but because it wishes to own. True self-love is entirely different. It is the love of the real self, and therefore the love of the real self in all. It does not produce arrogance or aloofness. It restores faith in the inherent good of life. It recognizes that human mistakes are temporary recordings upon experience, not the essence of identity. It believes that the soul can be cleansed, that the violet flame can transmute the record, that noble action can right imbalance, and that an altar swept clean of inordinate desire can receive the unfed flame of God. In this sense, true self-love is the foundation of all relationships. One who hates himself cannot purely love another. One who worships his ego cannot purely love another either. The first gives from deficiency, the second gives from possession. True self-love stands between these distortions. It honors the divine identity within the self, and for that very reason honors the divine identity within every other part of life. Human relationships then appear in a new light. There is love between husband and wife, parent and child, sibling and sibling, neighbor, servant and lord, disciple and master. There is the love between co-workers, between nations, between friends, between twin flames and soulmates. But all these forms must be purified by the original premise of love, that the individual parts of life are meant to find reunion with the whole. The text reads the Genesis statement, "It is not good that the man should be alone," in a broad metaphysical way. It is not merely a comment on human marriage. It is a revelation that manifestation itself is not meant to remain all one in an undifferentiated sense. The one expresses itself as many. The divine whole brings forth individual parts, stars of heaven and sands of the seashore, so that love may circulate, multiply, recognize itself, and return enriched to the source. This is why relationship becomes a sacred testing ground. In relationship, the soul discovers whether its love is expansive or possessive. It discovers whether it seeks the good of the other or the reinforcement of itself. It discovers whether it can remain faithful to divine principle when emotion becomes complicated. It discovers whether it can recognize the real self behind human error without excusing the error as divine. Family love is therefore honored, but not idolized. Romantic love is honored, but not made absolute. Twin flame and soulmate relationships are acknowledged within the book's esoteric framework, but they too are placed under law. Where karma does not permit a certain union in a given lifetime, the soul is not to despair. Polarity can be served through other sacred partnerships, other labors, other balanced expressions of alpha and omega. Love is larger than one arrangement. The divine whole is not defeated by one outer limitation. Saint Germain then turns to Christ love. This is love integrated with the allness of the cosmos. A love separated from the whole would not be God, and therefore would not be good. Christ love does not cling to the fragment against the whole. It loves the individual by loving him in God. It loves the many by seeking their restoration to the divine pattern. It loves the world by refusing to flatter the world's bondage. Christ's love is both personal and impersonal. This distinction is crucial. Jesus' response to the blind men who cry for mercy is personal love, direct, compassionate, immediate, and intimate. But the healing of the woman who touches his garment is presented as impersonal love, divine energy passing through the Christ without ordinary personal decision. In both cases, love heals. In one, it acts by conscious personal response. In the other, it acts through the universal Christ as law. This reveals the highest function of the alchemist. He is not asked merely to feel love. He is asked to become a vessel through which love can act personally and impersonally. Sometimes love will speak, touch, answer, comfort, and intervene. At other times, love will radiate silently because the alchemist has become aligned with the law. His very being becomes a center of blessing. The text's teaching on healing belongs to its spiritual universe and must be understood as such. It interprets disorder not merely through physical causes, but through the withdrawal or distortion of love, the return of hatred, and ancient karmic records. Its remedy is not merely emotional niceness, but flood tides of divine love and oceans of violet fire. In the book's language, the healer must be all love in action. The implication for the narration is not to turn this into medical instruction, but to preserve the spiritual meaning. Hatred divides, love coheres, fear contracts, love restores, misqualified energy burdens the soul, and sacred fire is invoked for transmutation. The law of love is therefore corrective as well as consoling. Saint Germain reminds the reader that divine chastening may itself be an action of love. This is difficult for the lower self to accept because the lower self wants love to mean perpetual approval. But the higher teaching is different. Love may comfort, but it may also purify. Love may encourage, but it may also expose. Love may gather the child to the heart, but it may also remove the poison from the child's hand. Here the trilogy on power, wisdom, and love reaches completion. Power must be God-controlled. Wisdom must become wise dominion. Love must fulfill the law through harmony. The three flames are not separate virtues, but one living trinity. Power without love dominates. Love without wisdom compromises. Wisdom without love chills the heart. But when the three rise together, the alchemist becomes balanced enough to receive, qualify, and release divine energy without betraying it. This balance is the hidden answer to the book's earliest question. How can a person alter destiny without misusing power? How can thought become form without feeding selfish desire? How can prayer become creative action without becoming sorcery? The answer is the threefold flame. The alchemist must be powerful, wise, and loving at once. Only then can precipitation become sacred artistry rather than self-assertion. Saint Germain closes this portion with a valentine, and the tone softens without losing its force. He asks the student to acknowledge the flame within the heart. He says, in substance, that one need not understand the entire mystery by scientific sophistication. It is enough to know that God is there and that within the heart is a point of contact with the divine, a spark from the Creator's own heart called the threefold flame of life. Every acknowledgement given to that flame amplifies the power and illumination of love. The heart is not to be neglected. It is the altar of God. It is the sun of manifest being. The disciple is to draw love from God, amplify it within the heart, and send it out into the world as a bulwark against planetary darkness. The prayer becomes simple. The light of the heart shines in the darkness of being, changes all into the golden treasury of the mind of Christ, projects love into the world, erases errors, breaks down barriers, and amplifies infinite love until it is victorious. The Valentine ends with encouragement. Saint Germain promises assistance to those who determine never to give up and never to turn back. As long as the soul faces the light, the shadows are behind, and the light is present to transmute them all. This is the emotional culmination of Book 3. The teaching has passed through power, wisdom, love, discipline, relationship, healing, and harmony. It ends not in theory but in pledge. The Master's promise is joined to the disciples' perseverance. Book 4 then opens with a sentence that changes the field of the entire work. In the beginning was the Word. The book now becomes a glossary, but this is not a mere appendix in the ordinary sense. It is called the Alchemy of the Word, stones for the wise master builders. The title matters. Words are stones. Definitions are building materials. Language is not neutral. To name a thing correctly is to place it within a spiritual architecture. To misunderstand a term is to build with a flawed stone. To speak without knowledge is to scatter force. To speak with inner alignment is to participate in creation. The glossary therefore functions as a lexicon of the book's universe. It teaches the reader how to think, speak, pray, and imagine within Saint Germain's system. It gathers terms from Christianity, theosophy, Ascended Master teaching, alchemy, Eastern religion, biblical symbolism, esoteric psychology, and devotional practice. In doing so, it shows that the book's alchemy is not one isolated technique. It is an entire language of transformation. The first kind of term defines the practitioner. An adept is not merely someone who has read occult books or cultivated unusual experiences. In the text, the adept is an initiate of high attainment, one who has gained control of matter, physical forces, nature spirits, and bodily functions, and who is undergoing advanced initiations of the sacred fire on the path of ascension. This definition immediately sets a high bar. Adeptship is not curiosity. It is mastery under law. The Akashic records then define the memory field of existence. Everything that transpires in an individual's world is said to be recorded in Akasha, the subtle substance that fills space and absorbs the impressions of life. This gives metaphysical depth to the earlier teaching on the etheric body and memory. Nothing is lost. Every thought, feeling, act, and pattern leaves an impression. But because records exist, they may also be read, understood, balanced, or transmuted under higher law. Alpha and Omega name the divine wholeness of Father, Mother, God, the beginning and the ending. This polarity is essential to the entire work. Creation is not sterile abstraction. It is the union of active and receptive, spirit and matter, father and mother, source and manifestation. The alchemist stands between Alpha and Omega, receiving the descending light and giving it form in the field of time. The Ascended Master is another defining term. In the book's tradition, an Ascended Master is one who has passed through the ritual of the Ascension and now serves from a higher octave of being. Saint Germain himself is presented in this way: Shohan of the Seventh Ray, Hierarch of the Aquarian Age, Sponsor of the United States, and Initiator of souls in alchemy and transmutation through the violet flame, the spoken word, meditation, and visualization. This definition gathers almost the entire book into one title. The chart of the divine self, though not fully unfolded in the narration, stands behind many of these terms. It depicts the I Am presence, the causal body, the Holy Christ self, the soul, and the tube of light. The chart gives visible form to the relationship between the divine source above, the mediating Christ self, and the embodied personality below. It is a diagram of descent and return. It shows why invocation matters. The lower self must call upon the higher must be given lawful entry into the lower world. The I Am presence is the individualized presence of God. It is the divine reality of the person, the source from which light, life, and true identity descend. Throughout the book, the student is told to call upon this presence not because God is absent, but because free will requires conscious cooperation. The I Am presence is not a remote abstraction. It is the highest truth of the self, the point from which divine will may enter time. The Holy Christ self is the mediator between the soul and the I Am presence. It is the inner teacher, the guardian of the divine pattern, the living Christ within. This concept explains why Saint Germain's alchemy is not merely self-help. The outer self is not asked to reinvent itself out of human imagination. It is asked to conform to a pre-existent divine pattern held by the Christ self. The alchemist does not become anything whatsoever. He becomes what he truly is in God. The violet flame is one of the most important glossary terms. It is defined as the seventh ray aspect of the Holy Spirit, the sacred fire that transmutes the cause, effect, record, and memory of sin or negative karma. It is also called the flame of transmutation, freedom, and forgiveness. This definition gives precision to the repeated calls for purification. The violet flame is not merely a purple image. It is the book's principal means of changing misqualified energy into liberated light. The decree is the spoken formula through which divine energy is invoked. Prayer asks, meditation communes. Mantra repeats sacred sound. Decree commands in the name of the I Am Presence. For Saint Germain, this is not empty verbalism. The spoken word is the essential ingredient of alchemy. Without the word spoken, the text says, there is no alchemy, no creation, no change, no interchange in any part of life. This is one of the strongest statements in the whole book. It places language at the heart of manifestation. The word is not merely communication. It is creative power. God creates by fiat, let there be light. The alchemist, made in the image of divine creativity, must also learn to speak lawfully. Words justify or condemn. Words build or tear down. Words hold patterns, release vibration, summon assistance, and qualify energy. The science of the spoken word is therefore the ritualized use of sound, prayer, decree, affirmation, and mantra to draw sacred fire from the I Am Presence, the Christ Self, and cosmic beings into matrices of transmutation and transformation. The text links this science to ancient Lemuria, to the Israelites at Jericho, to the Logos, and to the Aquarian work of Saint Germain. In its pure form, speech serves liberation. In its perverted form, speech becomes black magic, manipulation, or destructive force. The difference again is motive, purity, and alignment. The word itself is defined as the Logos, the power of God, and the realization of that power incarnate in and as the Christ. Through the Word, Father, Mother God communicates with humanity. The Christ is the personification of the Word. This brings the book back to the Gospel of John and to its opening statement, "In the beginning was the Word." Alchemy begins in light, but light is released by word. The universe is spoken into pattern. The alchemist learns to speak in harmony with the original speaking. The glossary also defines sacred fire. It includes the Kundalini fire, the Holy Ghost, the consuming fire of God, the flame of purification, alchemy, transmutation, and the ascent of the soul back to the One. This term connects Eastern yogic symbolism with Christian baptism by fire and the Ascended Master path of transmutation. Sacred fire is not ordinary emotion. It is divine energy in action. Sacred labor then brings the teaching down to earth. The soul's calling, profession, livelihood, or service becomes the means by which it establishes worth before itself and others. Through sacred labor, one develops God-given talents, offers them to humanity, balances the threefold flame, and passes the tests of the 7 rays. This is an important corrective. The path is not escape from work. Work itself may become the altar. Vocation becomes alchemy when it is offered in service. The tree of life is defined as symbolic of the I Am Presence and causal body of each individual, and of the connection between the children of light and their immortal source. This gathers the earlier teaching on the cloud and the path of destiny. The tree is not only a biblical image or a Kabbalistic diagram. In this book, it is the living structure of identity, root in God, branches in manifestation, fruit in service. The World Teacher entry widens the vision once more. It names an office in spiritual hierarchy held by ascended beings who represent the universal and personal Christ to unascended mankind. Jesus and Kuthumi are presented as holding this office in the current cycle, tutoring souls in self-mastery, Christ consciousness, karma, and dharma. This places the individual alchemist within a larger school of planetary instruction. Zadkiel, Archangel of the 7th ray, appears near the end of the glossary as a being associated with God freedom, the freedom flame, the science of alchemy, and the ritual of invocation. Together with Holy Amethyst, Zadkiel teaches the mastery of the 7th ray in governments, economies, and spiritual practice. This reinforces the Aquarian emphasis. The violet flame is not only private consolation. It belongs to freedom, transmutation, social order, and spiritual service. The glossary, then, is not accidental. It is a map of the entire path. It teaches the student who he is, what powers are available, what laws govern action, what beings assist the work, what dangers distort the path, and what language must be mastered. The alchemist must become a wise master builder, and the stones of this temple are words. After this long vocabulary of sacred construction, the book closes with Saint Germain's 9 steps to precipitation. These steps return the entire work to practical form. They are not presented as casual affirmations, but as a condensed formula for bringing an idea from light into manifestation. The first step is light. Light is the alchemical key. The first fiat of creation is, "Let there be light," and the alchemist begins by calling forth light where the I am that I am is present. This is the foundation. Creation does not begin with anxiety. It does not begin with grasping. It begins with illumination. Light precedes form. The second step is the mind blueprint. The student is to create a definite picture of the object or condition he wishes to produce, incorporating size, proportion, substance, density, color, and quality. The instruction is precise because thought must become precise before it can become effective. A confused image cannot easily precipitate a clear result. Yet the outer mind is not left alone. The student is told to give the embryonic idea to the higher mind, or Christ self, which is capable of holding patterns beyond ordinary limitation and perfecting designs according to truth. This is one of the most important safeguards in the formula. The alchemist does not merely visualize from the lower personality, he entrusts the visualization to the higher intelligence within. The Christ self becomes both apprentice and teacher. It helps design, correct, refine, and hold the pattern until it can be made worthy of manifestation. The third step is location. The alchemist determines where the object or condition is to manifest. This may seem simple, but metaphysically it matters. A pattern requires place. The void must be identified. Energy must have a field into which it can descend. To know where something is to appear is to give the matrix a point of contact with the world. The fourth step concerns atomic pattern. If the alchemist knows the material substance, he is to memorize its atomic pattern. If not, he is to call upon divine intelligence within the higher mind to register the pattern from universal intelligence and impress it upon the memory body and mind. Here the book's metaphysical ambition is clear. It treats matter as intelligible pattern, and the higher mind as capable of contacting that pattern beyond the outer intellect. The fifth step is to call for the precipitation of the atomic structure. This begins the descent from idea toward substance. The alchemist is no longer merely picturing, he is invoking structure. He is asking light to organize itself according to the pattern held in consciousness and sustained by higher intelligence. The sixth step is multiplication. The atomic structure must be multiplied until molecules of substance begin to fill the space in which the manifestation is desired. The language is technical and visionary at once. It describes manifestation as progressive densification, from light to idea to pattern to atom to molecule to formed substance. The seventh step is lowering into three-dimensional form. When the outline is filled with the vibratory action of fourth-dimensional substance, the alchemist asks for the full lowering of atomic density into physical manifestation within the matrix established by the mind. This step shows the book's layered cosmology. Form exists subtly before it exists materially. The task is not only to imagine, but to lower. Manifestation is descent through planes. The eighth step is sealing. When the visualization is complete, it must be sealed with the second fiat, "It is finished." This does not prevent later improvement. It completes the present model so that it can be acted upon. The alchemist also speaks the surrender of Jesus, "Not my will, but thine, be done." This ensures that power, wisdom, and love may amend the pattern where necessary so that the Creator's more perfect design may come forth. This is a beautiful and essential point. The alchemist creates, but he also yields. He forms, but he does not cling. He commands, but he submits to higher wisdom. The seal is not egoic closure. It is consecrated completion. The ninth step has several aspects. First, protect the experiment. The student is told to guard the creative intent and, as Jesus said, tell no man. This is the law of protection against interfering thought and feeling patterns. The unmanifested work is delicate. It must not be exposed prematurely to criticism, jealousy, ridicule, or even the confusion of too many minds. Sacred silence preserves energy. Next, await results without tension. Despair destroys the faith upon which the experiment is built. The student must hold faith as carefully as he holds the mental image. If years of emotional turbulence have built records within consciousness, those records must be consumed by the violet flame to make room for nobler forms. Delay is not necessarily failure. It may be purification in progress. Finally, the student must give time and energy to new ideas. Prayer becomes essential. Prayer opens the door of divine intervention in human affairs. It provides the avenue by which ascended masters and cosmic beings who desire to serve may lawfully assist because they have been called upon. The heavenly hosts must be invited. Free will must request intercession. The alchemist's prayer is therefore not ornamental. It is an opening in the law. This brings the entire book to its final formula, try. Theos means God, rule means law. You means being. Theos plus rule plus you means God's law active as principle within your being. This is the sacred cosmic formula, and it returns the path to a single, simple demand. Try. But now the word has changed. To try no longer means a weak attempt made in uncertainty. It means to let divine law become active within the self. It means to bring God, law, and being into union. It means to practice, invoke, purify, visualize, seal, protect, pray, serve, and persevere. It means to stop waiting for transformation as an outer accident and begin cooperating with transformation as an inner science. At the end of Saint Germain on Alchemy, the reader can see that the book has never truly been about gold in the ordinary sense. Gold was the symbol. The true gold is illumined consciousness. The true elixir is the living current of divine love. The true laboratory is the four lower bodies. The true crucible is the heart. The true flame is the threefold spark of power, wisdom, and love. The true word is the creative logos spoken through a purified soul. The true precipitation is not merely an object appearing from invisible substance, but the divine pattern of the self appearing through the purified substance of life. Saint Germain begins as the wonderman of Europe, the mysterious count whose age cannot be measured, whose jewels dazzle courts, whose warnings go unheeded by kings, and whose alleged feats unsettle ordinary history. But by the end of the book, the wonder has shifted. The greatest wonder is no longer that Saint Germain may have perfected diamonds, transmuted metals, or appeared across centuries. The greatest wonder is that the human being may be transformed. The book's message is demanding because it refuses helplessness. It does not allow the reader to remain merely a victim of circumstance, habit, fear, karma, or inherited mold. Yet it is also demanding because it refuses selfish power. It does not permit the reader to turn alchemy into greed, spectacle, or personal domination. The soul is told that it can create, but only safely when it becomes aligned. It can invoke, but only wisely when motive is purified. It can command, but only lawfully when power is balanced by wisdom and love. In this way, Saint Germain on Alchemy stands as a manual of sacred responsibility. Its universe is filled with masters, angels, flames, decrees, rays, records, symbols, and hidden laws. Yet beneath the elaborate metaphysic lies a simple moral architecture. Light must be received. Thought must be disciplined. Desire must be purified. Speech must be consecrated. Love must become cohesive. Power must be God-controlled. Wisdom must be practical. Prayer must become action. Action must become service. The alchemist, then, is not merely one who changes things. He is one who is changed enough to change things rightly. He does not begin with the ambition to command the universe. He begins by placing the heart upon the altar of God. He learns that every word matters, every thought molds substance, every emotion qualifies energy, every motive leaves a trace, and every prayer opens a door. He learns that the world is not dead matter but living possibility awaiting lawful light. And so the final teaching returns to the first fiat. Let there be light. Let there be light in the mind that has been darkened by anxiety. Let there be light in the heart that has been wounded by selfish love. Let there be light in the body burdened by memory and fear. Let there be light in the nation struggling to remember its spiritual purpose. Let there be light in the planet, in the elements, in the spoken word, in the sacred labor of every soul willing to become a wise master builder. For Saint Germain, this is the alchemy of freedom. Not freedom as escape from law, but freedom through law. Not freedom as indulgence, but freedom as mastery. Not freedom as isolation, but freedom as conscious participation in the divine whole. The soul becomes free when God's law is active as principle within its being. And this is why the book ends not with a sealed secret reserved for the few, but with a charge. The formula has been given, the light has been named, the flame has been described, the word has been placed in the mouth of the disciple. The cloud has been invoked, the heart has been revealed as an altar. The path has been opened from self-transformation to world service. The rest is practice. The rest is perseverance. The rest is the sacred courage to try. Thank you for journeying through Saint Germain on alchemy with occult mysticism. Share your comments below and connect with our community. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more transformative teachings. Until next time, keep transmuting lead into gold.